I want to remind you that this is video number 2 of a 3-part series, and I want you to make sure that you watch this entire video before you get started installing your Empasy ceiling. Let me tell you what the most important step is. The first thing we have to do is we have to find the center line of the room, of the ceiling. Understand this, in this job here, the floor joists above are running this direction, and what's going to happen is the main crossbars that support this ceiling, they're going to run perpendicular. So I went ahead and I've already chalked a chalk line on the floor that is the exact center of the room. Let's look at it. Here's the chalk line, all right? Let me tell you how I made that chalk line. My room happens to be 177.5 inches wide, all right? That is, if you divide that by 2, it's 88 3/4 inches. The wall that I'm looking at right here, that is what I call the primary wall because it's nice and straight, and I made sure that this chalk line is 88 3/4 inches away from that wall. It's parallel with that wall. Very important. Now, here is a really important thing to understand. You can only install this Empasy ceiling system one of 2 ways, so that you have even pieces at each end of the room. All right, so let me show you. Here is one of the panels. This is a regular panel that comes from the factory. And they're basically 24 inches square. I went ahead and made these little pencil marks here. You can just barely see it. A pencil mark right there, one here, and I put that on the chalk line. I then had little scrap pieces of these are exactly what is going to happen. This is not a main crossbar, but it's made the same way. It creates a 2-inch space between these panels. So I created the 2-inch space, another full panel, a 2-inch space, another full panel, and here's like a main crossbar right here. And you can see back in here, back against the wall, way over there, that's going to be a main crossbar that is along the wall, and we end up with a tile that's almost 21 inches, which is perfect. Here's the other way. Here's why we want to do it this way. The only other way you can do it is instead of centering a panel, you center a main crossbar. So imagine this is the main crossbar. It's right on the chalk line. You can see right there, there's the center point. So then you put the crossbar, the panel, crossbar, panel, crossbar, panel. But then look what happens. You end up with this very tiny piece. And so you don't want to do it that way. You always want to try to end up with as big a piece as possible for your layout. It's going to make the room look fantastic. I wanted to explain something that could really happen to you and could cause big problems. This is an outside corner that's in our room. It's a closet on the other side of my shoulder. Here's the problem. So once again, imagine I put the ceiling upside down, on the floor so you can see what's happening. And this is how the layout's going to be. But imagine if when you do your layout, here's the problem. When the ceiling's finished up above, there's going to be a mitered corner made out of a main crossbar here where my hand is, and this little small section is going to be made from a secondary crossbar that touches another main crossbar. But guess what? Let me show you what can happen. Let's imagine your layout. You do your layout, you get it centered, you think you know which way it's going to happen, and one of your main crossbars crashes into this corner. That's going to look horrible, all right? So you have to make a decision on what to do on your layout. You don't want that to happen. You don't want a main crossbar to crash into this corner here. So in my case, I was lucky. If you remember, it was about there. So you need to make sure, whatever you have to do to make sure that crossbar does not crash into your finished corner. And just as much, you really want to try to avoid this. You don't want to have a main crossbar right next to the main crossbar that's going to be along this wall. So you've got to take that into consideration when you have an outside corner like this. I want you to stick with me on this, okay? This is a little complex. Remember, I made a chalk line on the floor that represents the center line of the room. Now, I don't want you to make that same chalk line up above, and here's why. All right, number one, I made this little mock-up of the system, okay? So this is a small piece of main crossbar. This is a rail that fits into the crossbar, and this is the anchor. When the anchor is up on the ceiling, the edge of this part of the anchor is exactly 13/16 of an inch away from this edge of the main crossbar. So you have to do the math, and you have to determine from the center line, and this happens to be 3 inches wide, you have to determine where to chalk the line on the one side or the other of the anchor. You don't chalk the line and try to figure out how to put the anchor down the center of the chalk line. I want to show you exactly how this works in the real world up in the ceiling. Right here, where my thumbnail is, right here, that is exactly 88 3/4 inches from the primary wall, all right? And remember what we were going to do. We're making sure that the center of the panel is there. That's the center of the room. So you do the math and you lay it out on the ground, put the parts together. You can use a little mock-up like this, and what you're going to determine is once you have it done right, this is what you're going to end up with. See this right here? You're going to determine that this main crossbar right here is going to be so many inches away from the center of the room. It's simple as that. And you can see exactly how I've done it here. I want to show you a very important trick when you chalk a line. This chalk box is filled with chalk. And if I pull it up and I snap it now, the line is going to be really fuzzy. So I like to pull it tight, and then I actually flick it in the air to get a bunch of the dust off and the chalk dust. That will make a much crisper line up on the ceiling. I use this little mock-up to determine where the first anchor is going to go. All right, it's really important. And I went ahead and I measured the distance from the primary wall to where this anchor is going to be located. I then did the same thing at the other end of the room and went ahead and put up that anchor. All right, really important. That allowed me to chalk this first chalk line. All right, so now we're ready to install the first row of anchors all the way across the ceiling. I want to talk about how to put one of these anchors on your floor joist above. It's really important. They have to be straight. And that's why we did the chalk line, all right? Because this edge of the anchor, I want it right on the chalk line. But where on the chalk line? Really important. Look at this. If you remember, when I chalked the chalk line ran right along the edge of the anchor. So that means when you put the anchor in, you don't cover the chalk line, you don't put it in the center, you bring the anchor right to the edge of the chalk line and it will be perfectly placed. I want to show you how to start your next row of anchors. Really important. Embassy Ceilings, they make this fantastic spacing template, and it's extremely important. These notches are exactly where the anchors need to be. If you don't do that, the ceiling's not going to go together correctly. So you must use this template to start each new row. Look, I put that up here, and I've already got this anchor in, and you can see it's perfectly spaced. The next thing you need to know is how to put the anchors along the side walls, because you can't use the template for that. But it's very important that the anchors are spaced perfectly out from the wall, and let me show you how to do it. I made this little mock-up. This is a real main crossbar. Here's a rail, here's an anchor. And when you have the main crossbar tight against a wall, and you do the math, you find out, guess what? That the distance between the anchor and the wall is 13/16 of an inch. So I made this little spacing jig. Let me show you how it works. The way I do it is I bring the jig up, I make sure it's tight against the wall, I bring it up tight against the floor joist, and then I put an anchor and hold it in place tightly, just like that, so that the anchor is the exact 13/16 of an inch away from the wall. I want to show you something that's really important. You know that you've got the anchor in the right place when, after you put just one screw in, the tension of the anchor against the jig makes it so the jig does not fall to the ground. So this anchor is perfectly placed. The next step is drive the second screw and then pull the jig out of place. Let's do it. All the anchors are up, but before we go any further, I want to talk about something that's really important. Several things, in fact. Number one, all of the material we're going to put up next, it's made from wood fibers and glue, and it needs to acclimatize to the conditions in your rooms before you install it. So in other words, you need to bring the material down, and that means the main crossbars, the secondary crossbars, and the panels. You need to unpackage them, and you need to lay them flat on the ground for at least 48 hours. 72 hours and even a week would be better. That way you're not going to have expansion and contraction nightmares. One of the things I love about the Empathy ceiling, suspended ceiling system, and this is what it was designed for. Here's a little mock-up that I made, remember? All right, so, and this up here would be one of your floor joists, all right? So here's the anchor right here, if you remember. This is the anchor, and the anchor is attached to the floor joist above, all right? Now, the distance between the bottom of the floor joist and the top of a main crossbar can be some dimension between 1 1/8 inches and 1 3/8. That's it. So if you have something like a larger pipe that is attached to the underside of your floor joist, you're going to need to install furring strips so that you can make sure that the top of a main crossbar here is below whatever the lowest object is in your ceiling. Here's how the Empathy ceilings, suspended ceiling, works to get that 1 1/8 to 1 3/8 variation. Look at this. This is an anchor again. See that? And it's got these parallel grooves at an angle. It basically makes a French cleat. And if you remember, look at the rail. This is the rail, and it's got these 4 fins. Well, you can put this rail in any number of these configurations so that you either have just one, it's supported by 1 fin, or you can have 2 fins. And that is, or you can go down even one more and get the 3 fins. And that's how you get the variation. But it's really important. The ceiling system weighs, a big ceiling, it could weigh well over 100 pounds. You can only have a few of your anchors and rails on that 1 notch position here. See this? This one here. You cannot do this with the entire ceiling. It's always recommended to have at least 2 of the fins engaged with the rail. We're now at the exciting part. We're getting ready to put up the main cross rails. Here's what you need to know. Each cross rail from the factory, 8 feet long. Okay, you have to put up 6 of these rails, must go in each 8-foot length. It is non-negotiable. Here's why. These rails have been engineered to distribute the weight. In other words, when they slide in the dovetail and they come down like this entire length has got, the weight is taken back up to the anchor about where my hand would be. But what's happening is that weight of the ceiling is distributed across this rail. So do not cut the rails short thinking you're saving material. Don't do that. You must put the rails in as they come from the factory. Simple as that. In a rare occasion, depending on how your floor joist setup is on your ceiling, at one end or the other, you may have to shorten one of the rails to get it to fit between 2 anchors. Before I put up the main crossbar, the first one, there's something you need to know. The people at Embassy Ceilings are really smart. They know that in situations you're going to have some of these butt up against one another. Guess what they did? They made one end a groove and the other end a tongue, so that when you mate 2 main crossbars together, you make sure that the tongue goes into the groove. I want to show you why it's important to space the rails in the main crossbars before you bring it up to the ceiling. Look at this. So I spaced them so that the rails, as you can tell, are in between the anchors. Really important. That allows me, when I go to install the rail, I just have to put it in position like this. And you can already see it's partially suspended. And then I start to install the other ones and just march my way down and engage the rails with the anchors. I always install my first main crossbar. I always make sure that down here against the wall, that it's the groove part of the crossbar. If you make the tongue down here, you'll end up with a very ugly gap. I've got the first main crossbar in. It's now time to cut the next piece. Here's what's really great about the main crossbars. I'm going to take a measurement. It's going to be somewhere around 50 inches or so. And whatever piece I have left over, that's the piece that's going to start the next row. I'm getting ready to install the cut piece of main crossbar, but before I put it up, we had to install an extra rail up here on the first one. And the reason why is this rail is going to connect the 2 crossbars together, but it needs to be back out of the way before we install this next piece of crossbar. All of the main crossbars are in. It's amazing. The only ones we have left to do are along the walls. And here's a trouble that you're going to run into. When the drywall finishers finish the inside corners, they're almost never a pure 90-degree angle. So you'll end up with a gap if you just do a square cut. Let me show you. This has been square cut. This is a scrap piece. And I'm tight in a corner, but you can see here is a gap. So I have to cut some off of here and not so much here. And you can do that by just taking a pencil and making a scribe line. Earlier in the video, I talked about this outside corner, if you remember. It's now time to create that miter. I want to show you how it's done. This is a little trick that you might not have ever heard from anyone else. First and foremost, you might think that this is a 90-degree angle. It almost never is. The addition of the corner bead on this drywall causes it to be not 90 degrees, believe me. So what I do is I took some of the scrap leftover templates and I made different cuts at different angles. I did 46, 45, 47, you might even do 44. But you'll typically find that outside corners are some combination of 45 and a higher number. Inside corners, if you ever miter those, they're lesser, like 44, 43. All right, look at this. So I already did it. I already checked things out. And it turns out that on the long wall, we need a 45 piece. And on this short piece up above, we need a 46. And you can see that's a perfect miter, just like that. I want to show you what's happening up here at the ceiling level. We have to put a main primary crossbar all along this wall here, and it comes to the outside corner. And then we have to use a piece of secondary crossbar that's eventually going to fit in like this to make the miter out here. I want to show you how to mark the secondary crossbar to get the exact miter. Here's how you do it. I put the secondary crossbar up here. I hold it to the corner and I'm holding the crossbar tight against the main crossbar. I slide my 45-degree miter that I know is going to work right here, and then we're going to make a pencil mark. I want to show you how to mark the main primary crossbar here. We went ahead and put it up, and I put a couple of rails in just to suspend it at the right location, right? And it's tight in the corner down there. I already cut it the right length and cut the angle off. Now, and I know it's the 46-degree angle on the right side here, remember? So I slide this up. I had made a pencil mark where the two miters meet here, and now all I need to do is make a pencil mark here, and that's my cut line. I thought you might want to know how you finish along the one wall. Here are the primary crossbars that come in and they die into the wall. You might think you framed the whole wall, the entire room, with main crossbars. You don't. The way you do this is you just take a regular secondary crossbar and it just fills in to create the finished look. And then all we have to do is put a cut panel right here. And when we do the cut panel, we're not going to do it tight. It's really important. You have to have a little bit of expansion room. What happens is, normally the panels would lay on a 1/2-inch ledge here. So I'm going to take the dimension between this secondary crossbar and the secondary crossbar that'll be here, and then I will add 7/8 of an inch to cut the line. I wanted to talk about the pendulum effect. What can happen if you're not careful is once you have the primary crossbars installed, they can wiggle. They can wiggle up here, and it's because of the flex between the rails and the anchors. So you have to make sure that you put in the secondary crossbars and keep them tight so that you can get the accurate measurement between this main crossbar and the one along the wall that's going to be a cut secondary crossbar. I cut this secondary crossbar to fit tight as can be here. It's really important to begin to put these things in as you install the panels so that you keep everything nice and tight. So watch how this goes in. It's really simple. This was the factory tenon that was created. I had to make my own so that it will lap over and rest up on top of this primary crossbar back here. Watch this. So I just slide it up into there, get it in line, push it and tight, and there it is. It is beautiful. I want to show you how to create a tenon when you cut a secondary crossbar. There's a couple of things you could really make a mistake on. Look down here. Here I've got a small scrap piece of primary crossbar with a small piece of rail in it. It's really important to do this. I also use a piece of cardboard to protect the delicate finish of the material. So what you do is, I've cut the secondary crossbar to length. It's exactly what I want. So I butt it in here, and the manufacturer says, out of scrap pieces of your panel, to cut a 2 by 3 inch block. Here's what happens. You have to lap it over on top of the secondary crossbar, but the reason I want the rail here is you never want it to extend. If you, by mistake, just put it like this, when you go to put this up, it's going to hit a rail and you won't be able to get it in. That's why I like to have a small piece of rail here to act as a guide, and I bring this up and hold it about 1/8 of an inch away. And then all you do, drill a pilot hole, take one of the lath screws that are 3/4 of an inch long. I'm holding it in place, nice and tight. I check to make sure it's parallel. I'm making sure that this is tight against here. It's time to drill the second hole. It's that simple to create a tenon. Just do this all the way around the entire ceiling on the edges and you're good to go. We've got all of the secondary crossbars cut and installed, and we've installed a lot of panels. The full ones are all in. Now it's time to finish cutting all of the cut panels. Let me take you on a tour. We've already cut a few right here, but you can see we just have the outline to do. We have to cut this little one here. It's going to have a notch cut out of it to go around the outside corner. And then we're going to finish these right here. We're going to be done in just a few minutes. It's so exciting. I have to tell you, it's just an amazing ceiling system. It's really simple to put in. The biggest thing you have to make sure if you want perfection is those anchors must be in a straight line, and you must check every one with that special template that's included, because that's going to ensure that your secondary crossbars are tight. You're going to love your Empathy Ceiling suspended ceiling system.
If you want to discover more home improvement tips, go to AskTheBuilder.com.